Rooted in the history of my people and this land. I want to tell a story of Liberia. Will you listen for a while? It's rather ironic where this story begins. In 1607, Europeans came to America. As subjects of British law, they brought with them the European concept of indentured servitude, a euphemism for temporary slavery. Anyway, these indentured servants were white people who had their passage paid in exchange for 7 years of servitude. After that, they were set free and given a plot of land, money, and seeds to begin a life of their own. It wasn't until 1619 that the first Africans arrived in America when a Dutch ship docked in Jamestown, Virginia. The Africans, who were actually the ship's cargo, were traded for food and placed under the same stipulations as other indentured servants, that they would gain their freedom in 7 years. However, continually buying and trading African slaves was expensive and cut into profits from the tobacco crop. So it wasn't long before the colonists decided to model their slave codes after those in the Caribbean that mandated perpetual servitude. Not only were the Africans slaves for their entire lives, but so were their children and every generation born thereafter. Some people focus on slavery as if it first began at that time and in America. In reality, slavery has been part of many cultures and places, including African custom, for as long as anyone can remember. Tribes would conquer other tribes and use the conquered as their own slave or sell them at the slave markets. This was a common practice throughout the history of my people. But the institution of slavery in America was different. The issue of freedom drives much human behavior, and it's ironic that as the population of black slaves in America grew, the American colonists began their own fight for freedom from Britain. This was, of course, known as the American Revolution. In the midst of this battle for release from English rule, the idea of self-government took form. Something radical and revolutionary was created as a result: the Declaration of Independence.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men.
The colonists wanted to start over with a blank slate, a tabula rasa, as if starting over were really part of the human experience. They wanted self-rule and attempted to create a level of equality that had previously only existed in theory. In 1781, with the defeat of the British at Yorktown, America became a free and independent nation, proclaiming liberty throughout the land. Now, how in good conscience could these champions of freedom talk of such a thing when they were slaveholders themselves? It's as if they were blind to their own hypocrisy. The very men who fought for freedom were dependent on slaves, people who were not free and had no chance for freedom. Of course, it is not human nature to want to be enslaved. Slavery, as it was practiced in America, had a dehumanizing effect, leaving the slaves with no hope for a better life. Slaves had started to revolt and plan conspiracies even before the beginning of the American Revolution. The slaveholders greatly feared the uprising of their slaves, and their fears were confirmed in 1791 with the Haitian Revolution.
The whites felt at that time that these people who were here, these free black people, remaining here would be threatening to their society and their economy. So it would be good to get rid of them. And those who were still holding slaves felt if those free people remain here, they will still bring up about some disturbance.
White Americans feared a massive slave uprising similar to the Haitian Revolution and were intimidated by free blacks becoming an integral part of the country's economy. The question was, what to do about it? Thomas Jefferson, one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence and a slave owner himself, wrote that all men are created equal. But the language was not meant to be inclusive and therefore was never applied to blacks, including free blacks. Full and equal citizenship would never occur under the government of his time. When Thomas Jefferson was a member of the General Assembly, he could not envision an integrated society in which free blacks were American citizens. He made a proposal to Congress for the emancipation and colonization of free blacks from the state of Virginia. The terms of the bill provided for the acquisition of territory elsewhere in the world for the gradual colonization of free blacks in a land of their own.
The whole commerce between master and slave is a perpetual exercise of the most boisterous passions, the most unremitting despotism on the one part, the most degrading submission on the other. I tremble for my country when I think that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. The blacks may assert their freedom. The Almighty has no attribute which can take sides with us in such a contest.
Although Jefferson had a strong argument, Congress rejected the idea. Meanwhile, there was a growing movement to abolish slavery.
And simply put, it was a moral force they thought they would bring to bear within the body politics to persuade their fellow Americans that it was immoral, it was ungodly to hold people in slavery. The thing to do was to abolish slavery and grant to these people their full citizenship.
By 1807, Congress had not abolished slavery, but had outlawed the trading of slaves by voting to ban their importation. Instead of the slave trade coming to a close, it flourished as traders continued illegally importing slaves through North Carolina for use in the southern agricultural states. You see, Eli Whitney had invented the cotton gin 10 years earlier, which had made the cotton crop very profitable. So the plantation owners needed even more slaves to keep up with the demand. Despite the increase in demand for slaves, the idea of colonization had not died. Jefferson, now president, contacted the British to secure their consent to send free blacks from America to Sierra Leone, the country established by the British for the repatriation of their freed slaves. Again, he was denied. It was a wealthy free black shipping merchant by the name of Paul Cuffey, a strong proponent of colonization, who secured the immigration of free blacks to that West African country. In 1811, he sailed to Sierra Leone and founded the Friendly Society of Sierra Leone for the purpose of sending free blacks to that country. The War of 1812 further deferred the colonization of free blacks, but Paul Cuffey would not let the dream die. In 1815, he transported 38 free blacks from Massachusetts to Sierra Leone at his own expense, a sum of $4,000. To some of us, that's a lot of money even now. So imagine the significance of his investment then. In 1817, Paul Cuffey died before his dream was fully realized. But his success was a turning point in efforts for colonization. Another strong proponent of the cause, Reverend Robert Finley, saw colonization as an opportunity for charitable work, a chance to bring Christianity to Africa. In time, the former slaves who went to Africa would carry out this mission.
The thinking of that period among Westerners, which they were, clearly was no different from that of other white Americans. So part of their mission for going to Africa was, of course, to Christianize and civilize the savage Africans.
Many free blacks, devout Christians, wanted to return to the homeland of their forefathers, but they were unable to solicit support on their own behalf because they couldn't vote and had little chance for political or educational opportunities. They were less than whites, in a sense non-citizens in this white elitist society, despite the fact that they were theoretically free. So, a growing number wanted to emigrate to Africa, but other free blacks wanted to stay in America and fight for the abolishment of slavery. At that time, the abolishment of slavery seemed unlikely, since there was still a continuous flow of slaves being imported into America illegally. But the population of free blacks was also still growing, and what to do about that remained a topic of great concern. Reverend Finley traveled to Washington, D.C. to win the support of the government. While there, he won the support of his brother-in-law, Elias Caldwell, clerk of the Supreme Court, and his friend, Francis Scott Key. Together, the three canvassed citizens, churches, and other organizations to gain support for their plan. They formed the American Society for the Colonization of Free People of Color, later known as the American Colonization Society. The ACS was one of the most distinguished group of citizens ever assembled in any organization in American history.
When the American Colonization Society was formed in December of 1816, all of its leaders were white, many of them slaveholders who did not want a free black population in the United States. They felt that the free black population belied slavery, that if you had a slave here and you said blacks were only capable of slavery, and then you had a rich seaman, black man like Paul Cuffey owning ships and traveling up and down the coast, how are you going to continue to claim that blacks are only able to be slaves?